began in the shadows of uncertainty. 1942, a year when the outcome of World War II still hung precariously in the balance. Nazi Germany's forces stretched from the Atlantic to the Volga, and Imperial Japan's empire seemed unstoppable across the Pacific. In Washington, D.C., a new kind of warfare was taking shape. One fought not with tanks or bombers, but with deception, sabotage, and intelligence. Out of this urgency, the Office of Strategic Services was born, the OSS, America's first centralized intelligence agency, and the direct forerunner of today's CIA. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the order establishing the OSS on June 13, 1942. Its mission was unlike anything America had attempted before: to collect information, conduct psychological operations, and execute covert missions behind enemy lines. The man chosen to lead it was Major General William J. Wild Bill Donovan, a decorated World War I hero known for his daring and unorthodox methods. Donovan once said, "We must fight fire with fire, and the devil with the devil's weapons." Under his command, the OSS would recruit linguists, scientists, engineers, scholars, and even Hollywood filmmakers. Their battleground was secrecy itself. Operating out of an unmarked building in downtown Washington, the OSS became a hive of intrigue. The agency developed cutting-edge gadgets, miniature cameras hidden in lighters, explosives disguised as lumps of coal, and silenced pistols that could eliminate a target without a sound. But it was the human element that made the OSS truly dangerous. Agents trained to blend into foreign cities, infiltrate enemy networks, and vanish without a trace. The European front demanded immediate action. As the Allies planned for Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, Donovan's teams were already deep in enemy-held territory, gathering intelligence on Vichy French defenses. Many were civilians turned spies overnight, operating with little support, and even less chance of survival if captured. Yet, what these men and women achieved laid the foundation for Allied victories yet to come. In a confidential OSS memorandum dated late 1942, Donovan wrote, "We are building a service that will never be thanked, and whose successes must remain unknown." That phrase became the quiet creed of those who served in the OSS. Missions were compartmentalized. One unit rarely knew what another was doing. Even within Allied command structures, the OSS was sometimes viewed with suspicion, too independent, too secretive. British intelligence, particularly the Special Operations Executive, SOE, often clashed with their American counterparts over methods and information sharing. Yet both organizations shared the same deadly playground: occupied Europe. It was during this time that some of the OSS's most dangerous operations began to take shape. Missions whose names would be buried in sealed files for decades. Codenames like Ginny, Cardinal, Sauerkraut, and Jedburgh appeared briefly in war logs before vanishing under the stamp of top secret. Few outside Donovan's inner circle knew their true objectives. Fewer still survived to tell the tale. These covert assignments weren't just about espionage, they were about risk. Calculated, relentless, and often fatal. Agents infiltrated deep behind enemy lines to destroy railways, intercept communications, and organize resistance networks. They carried cyanide pills in case of capture, knowing that falling into German or Japanese hands meant certain torture and death. Every transmission sent, every drop zone chosen, was a roll of the dice in a deadly game of survival. What makes these operations remarkable is not just their daring, but their disappearance from public record. Many of the OSS's wartime missions were deliberately erased after 1945, either to protect ongoing intelligence methods or to conceal political embarrassments. When the OSS was dissolved in 1945, much of its documentation was transferred to the War Department under lock and key. Decades later, historians would discover entire operations omitted from the official record, their code names redacted, their outcomes classified. Perhaps that was always the intention. Donovan himself told his staff that the OSS must operate in the dark and remain there. For the men and women who lived by that code, anonymity was both armor and curse. They fought a war no one would publicly acknowledge, in countries they could never claim to have visited. Some vanished completely, their names missing from rolls, their graves unmarked. Yet, in the shadows, they changed the course of the war. Their intelligence shaped the Normandy landings. exposed Nazi industrial secrets, and sabotaged enemy supply chains. And while most of the world focused on famous battles, Normandy, Stalingrad, Midway, the OSS waged a quieter, more secret struggle whose victories remained invisible but no less decisive. In the years that followed, whispers of these covert missions would resurface, fragments of reports, coded telegrams, and declassified memos hinting at operations long forgotten. Each one revealed a small piece of the vast, hidden war the OSS had fought and the sacrifices it demanded. But it was not until decades later that the truth began to emerge of the missions that went wrong, the operatives who vanished, and the secrets the OSS carried to their graves. One such mission, launched in early 1944 along the Ligurian coast of Italy, would expose the extreme dangers these agents faced and the lengths to which the Axis would go to silence them. That operation was known only by a single name: WWII. And for decades, its true story was buried beneath layers of classified files and wartime silence. In the winter of 1944, as Allied forces advanced slowly up the Italian peninsula, a handful of men prepared for one of the most daring and ill-fated covert missions of the entire war. Codenamed Operation WWII, it was an OSS-led sabotage operation meant to cripple German logistics along the Ligurian coast. But what began as a textbook example of behind-the-lines warfare would end in tragedy, secrecy, and one of the most shocking breaches of international law in the Second World War. The mission was born out of desperation. German forces under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring had fortified northern Italy into a near-impenetrable defensive barrier, known as the Gothic Line. Supply lines from the Ligurian coast supported the German 135th Fortress Brigade, reinforcing the mountain passes above La Spezia. Allied intelligence believed that destroying a key railway tunnel between Fremura and Bonassola could paralyze enemy reinforcements and delay the movement of critical supplies to the front. Early February 1944, the OSS Mediterranean branch, operating out of Naples, received authorization to execute the mission. Lieutenant Vincent Russo, a decorated US Army officer fluent in Italian, was chosen to lead a 15-man team composed of Italian-American volunteers from the 2677th OSS Regiment. Many of them had trained for months in demolitions, small unit tactics, and clandestine infiltration. They were equipped with silenced pistols, explosive charges, and radio sets packed into watertight containers, all designed for stealth landings from the sea. On the night of February 22nd, the team embarked aboard 2 PT boats under cover of darkness, departing from Corsica's Bastia harbour. The plan was simple, yet perilous: land undetected near Fremura, destroy the railway tunnel, and escape by dawn. But weather and navigation proved unforgiving. Heavy surf and inaccurate charts caused the first attempt to fail. 2 nights later, Russo tried again, only for the landing craft to miss the designated cove. By February 26th, time was running out. The element of surprise was fading, and the Germans had begun to tighten coastal patrols. Despite the setbacks, Russo insisted on a third and final attempt. On the evening of March 22nd, 1944, the OSS team landed successfully near Fremura, rowing ashore in inflatable boats. But within hours, their luck collapsed. The radio operator failed to make contact with headquarters. Their maps were damaged by seawater, and most devastatingly, a local informant spotted their presence near the railway tracks. Before dawn, a German patrol from the 135th Fortress Brigade surrounded and captured the entire team. The men were taken to La Spezia, interrogated by the Gestapo, and transferred to the headquarters of the 135th Brigade. Under the Geneva Conventions, captured saboteurs in uniform were entitled to POW status. But the OSS team, dressed in a mixture of civilian and partial military clothing for disguise, fell into a grey area, one the Germans exploited mercilessly. On March 26, 1944, an order arrived directly from Kesselring's command. The prisoners were to be executed as spies. What followed remains one of the most chilling wartime atrocities committed against Allied special forces. On the morning of March 26th, all 15 men were lined up along a ditch near La Spezia and shot by firing squad, without trial, without warning, and without record. Their bodies were hastily buried in unmarked graves, and the incident was officially erased from German field reports. The operation that had once promised to strike a blow against the Nazi war machine vanished into silence. For decades, the US government classified all documents related to Operation Ginny families of the executed OSS agents received only vague notifications that their loved ones were missing in action. The truth did not surface until 1948, when a war crimes investigation team uncovered testimony from German officers captured in Italy. Among the documents was a signed order from Kesselring's staff, evidence of direct involvement in the unlawful executions. During the Nuremberg subsidiary trials, General Anton Dostler, commander of the 75th Army Corps, was found guilty of violating the laws of war by carrying out the execution order. On December 1, 1945, Dostler was executed by firing squad at Aversa, Italy. It marked one of the first post-war trials where following superior orders was rejected as a defense. Still, Operation Ginny remained shrouded in obscurity. Most Americans never heard of it. Even within the intelligence community, the event was discussed only in hushed tones. When the OSS archives were finally declassified decades later, historians discovered the haunting details: coded messages, false landing coordinates, and the chilling last report from Rousseau's team, transmitted hours before capture, reading simply, "Target sighted, proceeding with objective." In 1995, 50 years after the war's end, the US Army posthumously awarded each member of the Ginny team the Distinguished Service Cross. A small plaque now stands near Framura, Italy, commemorating their sacrifice. Yet the true mystery remains: why the mission went ahead despite so many warnings, and why higher command approved a third attempt under near-suicidal conditions. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was the unforgiving logic of covert war, where orders are obeyed, risks are assumed, and failure is buried under secrecy. The OSS learned harsh lessons from Ginny's failure: the limits of secrecy, the danger of miscommunication, and the human cost of shadow operations. But within months, new missions were already being planned. This time, deep in the heart of occupied France. There, OSS agents would merge with Britain's Special Operations Executive to launch an ambitious plan that would prepare the way for D-Day itself, and create a new kind of resistance warfare known by a single name: Jedburgh. By the spring of 1944, the Allies were preparing for the largest invasion in history, Operation Overlord. The fate of Nazi-occupied Europe would hinge not only on the beaches of Normandy, but on the chaos that could be sown behind German lines. The OSS and Britain's Special Operations Executive, two secret organizations often at odds in method but united in mission, formed a joint plan to unleash small, highly trained teams into enemy territory. They were called the Jedburghs. The name itself came from a Scottish border town, but the spirit of the operation was far more audacious. Between May and September 1944, more than 300 Jedburgh teams, each composed of 3 men, parachuted into France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Typically, a team consisted of 1 British officer, 1 American officer, and 1 local interpreter or radio operator. Their objective: link up with local resistance groups, disrupt German communications, and coordinate sabotage efforts as Allied forces advanced after D-Day. These men were not ordinary soldiers. They were polyglot commandos, trained in small unit tactics, explosives, and espionage. In the quiet corners of Milton Hall in England, the Jedburgh Training Centre, they learned how to kill silently, transmit radio messages under pressure, and survive off the land. Their instructors came from both SOE and OSS backgrounds, blending British cunning with American improvisation. Each team operated independently, armed with little more than a Sten gun, a Fairbairn Sykes dagger, a wireless transmitter, and a cyanide capsule. The first Jedburgh teams dropped into France just before D-Day, June 5, 1944. Among them was Team Hugh, led by American Captain Bernard Knox, a former Harvard student who had volunteered for special duty. Their mission took them into the Vercors Plateau, where the French Maquis were already mobilizing against the Germans. Within days, the plateau became a battlefield, with Jedburgh radios relaying coded coordinates for Allied supply drops. But when the Germans launched a counter-offensive with paratroopers and armored units, the resistance was decimated. Many of the Maquis fighters were killed or captured, and several Jedburgh teams simply disappeared, presumed dead, their final transmissions cut mid-sentence. Other teams fared better. Team James coordinated sabotage operations that destroyed over 100 railway lines in Brittany. Team Freddy ambushed convoys near Chartres. forcing the Germans to divert critical resources away from the Normandy front. Their impact was undeniable. German High Command later admitted that organized partisan warfare had slowed their troop movements by nearly 2 weeks, a delay that proved critical for Allied success in Normandy. Despite their heroism, the Jedburghs lived under constant uncertainty. Each mission carried immense personal risk, not only from the enemy, but from betrayal. German intelligence had infiltrated several resistance cells, feeding false information that led to ambushes. Some teams landed directly in areas already compromised. A British officer from Team Gilbert recalled, "We jumped into darkness and silence and realized within an hour that we'd been betrayed. The Gestapo were waiting for us." Only one of the 3 men survived. The OSS archives contain fragments of these missions, coded field reports, casualty lists, and cryptic diary entries written in pencil on thin ration paper. One such note, found decades later, read simply, "Radio destroyed. Locals dispersed, holding until dusk." The author was never identified. These small pieces of evidence hint at the invisible sacrifices made in the shadows of D-Day, acts of defiance and courage that never made it into official communiques. As Allied armies pushed east, the Jedburghs adapted, turning from sabotage to coordination. By late August 1944, teams were working with regular French units to secure liberated cities. In some cases, Jedburghs even negotiated the surrender of isolated German garrisons, using their fluency in multiple languages and their reputation for ruthlessness. Yet for every successful operation, others ended in silence. Records from the OSS indicate that at least 20 teams were never recovered, their names listed simply as missing, presumed dead. For decades, historians struggled to piece together what happened to these lost operatives. Some were likely executed as spies, their identities erased by the Gestapo. Others may have joined local resistance groups and vanished amid the chaos of liberation. A few unconfirmed reports suggest that several Jedburgh agents continued underground operations well into 1945, when Nazi counterintelligence was collapsing and records were destroyed in retreat. In 1984, when classified OSS documents were finally declassified, the story of the Jedburghs began to surface publicly. Veterans who had lived in silence for 40 years began to speak. One of them, Major Paul Schmidt, reflected, "We didn't fight for medals or headlines. We fought for the chance to make chaos and then disappear." His words captured the essence of these ghost soldiers who existed in the space between military and myth. Operation Jedburgh was officially terminated in late 1944, as Allied conventional forces took control of most of Western Europe. But its legacy endured. The methods pioneered by the Jedburghs, local cooperation, deep insertion, guerrilla coordination, became the foundation for modern special operations. The US Army's Green Berets, established in the 1950s, would later adopt the motto "De oppresso liber," to free the oppressed, a direct echo of the Jedburgh spirit. Still, many questions remain unanswered. The fate of several teams is unknown, their missions never fully documented. In the rolling fields and quiet villages of rural France, unmarked graves are occasionally uncovered, containing fragments of Allied uniforms and rusted wireless sets, silent remnants of men who parachuted into darkness and never returned. Their sacrifice marked a turning point in covert, warfare, a model for the kind of deep cover missions that the OSS would expand beyond Europe. For in the jungles of Burma and the mountains of Asia, another branch of the OSS was already fighting a different kind of invisible war, one that would vanish from the official record for years to come. That secret front was called Operation Cardinal. Far from the beaches of Europe, in the unforgiving jungles of Southeast Asia, another secret war was unfolding. It was a campaign fought not for headlines or territory, but for intelligence and survival. The OSS called it Operation Cardinal, though few outside Donovan's inner circle ever heard the name. It was part of the broader operations of Detachment 101, the first American guerrilla unit to fight deep behind Japanese lines. Their battlefield, the wild mountainous terrain of northern Burma, 1942 to 1945. Burma was a forgotten front of World War II, a place where British, American, Chinese, and local forces fought a brutal campaign against the Japanese army. The jungles were suffocating, disease-ridden, and nearly impassable. The Japanese 18th Division controlled the mountain passes, threatening the Allied supply line to China known as the Ledo Road. To disrupt them, the OSS formed a new kind of fighting force, a blend of intelligence agents, saboteurs, and local tribesmen, tasked with turning the jungle into an invisible weapon. Detachment 101 was commanded by Colonel Carl F. Eifler, a hard-edged former police officer with little patience for convention. Under his leadership, the unit trained Kachin tribesmen, fierce hill warriors with an unrivaled knowledge of the terrain, to ambush Japanese patrols, destroy bridges, and report troop movements. What began with a handful of men in 1942 grew into a formidable force of over 10,000 native fighters, supported by fewer than 150 Americans. Their motto was simple: get the job done and get out. Operation Cardinal began in late 1944, at the height of the monsoon season. Its goal was to infiltrate deep into Japanese-held territory near Myitkyina, where enemy supply columns were moving north to reinforce the front. A small OSS team, just 7 Americans and a band of Kachin guides, was tasked with identifying supply depots and relaying coordinates for airstrikes. Radio contact would be minimal and resupply drops uncertain. For all intents and purposes, they were on their own. The team's leader was Captain Robert Temple, a former forestry expert from Oregon who spoke fluent Burmese. His second-in-command, Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Woodrow, kept a journal that would later become one of the few surviving records of the mission. On November 18, 1944, Woodrow wrote, "We move at dawn. The jungle breathes like a living thing. No one back home will ever believe what this war looks like." For the first 2 weeks, Operation Cardinal went according to plan. The team successfully identified several ammunition caches along the Mogang Valley, relaying their positions via coded bursts to an OSS base in India. B-25 bombers later struck the sites with devastating accuracy. Japanese troop movement slowed, and Allied command noted a sudden drop in enemy supply efficiency. The operation was working until the radio went silent. On December 5th, all transmissions from Temple's team ceased. Attempts to re-establish contact failed. Rescue patrols were impossible. The monsoon rains had flooded the trails, and Japanese patrols had intensified. For weeks, Detachment 101 received no word. Then, in early January 1945, scattered reports from Kachin informants spoke of a skirmish near the upper Hukong Valley, a firefight between local tribesmen and Japanese soldiers, with American equipment found at the site. No bodies were recovered. After the war, OSS records listed Operation Cardinal as completed, outcome unverified. Temple and his 6 men were declared missing in action. The mystery deepened when declassified post-war Japanese documents revealed that in December 1944, the 18th Division had captured several foreign commandos operating in Kachin territory. Their fate was never recorded. In the late 1950s, a former Kachin scout named Nao Pa claimed he had guided the Americans to a hidden ridge before the Japanese closed in. He told an interviewer from the US Army's Historical Division, "They fought until night, then I saw flames and heard shots. After that, nothing." His testimony was dismissed at the time as unreliable. But in 1991, a joint US-Myanmar expedition recovered fragments of American gear, a rusted compass, a spent .45 shell, and the remnants of an OSS-issue radio set, near the coordinates Norpaw had described. Whether these belonged to Operation Cardinal remains uncertain. No complete record of the mission's aftermath exists. The team's final encoded message, decrypted decades later, read, "Objective near. Moving west before dawn. Silence after contact." It was transmitted at 0432 hours on December 5, 1944, the last signal ever received from the group. Historians have long debated why Operation Cardinal was classified for so long. Some believe the mission's failure endangered larger Allied operations in Burma. Others suggest it exposed intelligence-sharing tensions between the British SOE and the OSS. What's undeniable is that Detachment 101 continued to operate, effectively despite the loss, conducting ambushes, assassinations, and rescues that ultimately crippled Japanese control over northern Burma. General Joseph Stilwell later called them the best damn guerrilla outfit this war produced. When the OSS was dissolved in October 1945, the details of Cardinal and dozens of similar missions were buried in classified archives. Their records remained sealed until the 1980s. When declassification efforts revealed only fragments, maps with redacted coordinates, field reports with entire pages missing. It was as if someone had deliberately erased the trail. To this day, the men of Operation Cardinal, have no known graves. Theirs was the kind of mission the OSS was built for: invisible, expendable, unacknowledged. Yet the lessons they left behind, of courage in isolation, of cooperation between cultures, of sacrifice without recognition, would shape the philosophy of special operations for generations. Still, even as the war in Asia raged, another OSS campaign was unfolding in Europe, one unlike any other. This operation would rely not on explosives or sabotage, but on deception and psychology. It was as risky as it was strange, and for many of those who took part, it would be their last. That operation was called Sauerkraut. By late 1944, the Allies were closing in on Nazi Germany from all sides. But as the front lines advanced, another kind of warfare intensified. One waged not with bullets, but with minds. Deep within the OSS's psychological warfare branch, a daring and morally complex plan was taking shape. Its codename, Operation Sauerkraut. The objective was as unconventional as it was audacious: to turn captured German prisoners of war into undercover saboteurs and send them back behind enemy lines. They would be reinserted into the Reich disguised as loyal soldiers, tasked with spreading disinformation, sowing confusion, and undermining morale from within. It was espionage at its most dangerous. And for many of the men involved, it was a one-way mission. The concept originated in the OSS Field Detachment in Rome, under the command of Colonel Robert H. Taylor, an officer who believed the best way to destroy the Nazi war machine was to make it distrust itself. Taylor's men realized that German POWs who were anti-Nazi, or who had fallen out of favor with their officers, could be valuable assets. The plan was simple in theory: recruit and retrain these prisoners, equip them with forged papers and uniforms, and deploy them through the front lines into enemy-held territory. But in practice, it demanded absolute secrecy and ruthless precision. Training took place at hidden camps near Siena, Italy, where German POWs were quietly separated from the main compounds. OSS linguists and interrogators, many of them German-speaking Jewish refugees, carefully selected candidates who showed strong anti-Hitler sentiment or a willingness to cooperate. Each recruit underwent weeks of preparation, memorizing false identities, practicing coded communication, and rehearsing fabricated backstories to withstand Gestapo interrogation. Once ready, they were assigned to small infiltration teams led by OSS handlers. The first such team crossed the lines in September 1944 near the Brenner Pass. Disguised as Wehrmacht transport officers, they carried fake orders and propaganda leaflets designed to look like official military bulletins. Their mission: to distribute falsified reports claiming massive Allied advances and internal dissent within the German High Command. Days later, intercepted German messages indicated confusion in the ranks. The operation had succeeded. Encouraged by the results, the OSS expanded the program. Over the following months, dozens of small teams were deployed across northern Italy, Austria, and southern Germany. Some were tasked with spreading rumors about non-existent partisan uprisings. Others sabotaged communication lines or destroyed fuel depots, using time-delayed explosives disguised as coal briquettes. One such device, known as Aunt Jemima, looked like a bag of flour but contained a potent explosive compound, a hallmark of OSS ingenuity. Yet with success came tragedy. Many of these infiltrators, German defectors fighting under American command, were eventually discovered. In November 1944, a three-man cell operating near Innsbruck vanished after a courier failed to make contact. Their bodies were later found in a roadside ditch, executed by the SS. Others simply disappeared, swallowed by the fog of war. OSS reports note dozens of agents missing, presumed dead during the winter of 1944-45. Their names omitted from official casualty lists to preserve deniability. The most mysterious case was that of Team Falcon, deployed in January 1945 to Salzburg with orders to sabotage rail convoys carrying supplies to the Eastern Front. The team's radio operator, a former German corporal named Dieter Hauff, transmitted 3 successful updates before his signal abruptly ceased. Post-war records from German archives mention the capture of enemy infiltrators in Wehrmacht uniform in that same region, but no trace of the team or their remains was ever found. In 1983, declassified OSS files revealed that Team Falcon had been carrying a new kind of transmitter prototype, one never recovered from the field. Operation Sauerkraut pushed the limits of wartime ethics. Even within the OSS, many questioned the morality of sending defectors into near-certain death. Colonel Taylor justified it as necessary psychological warfare, arguing that doubt and fear are weapons as powerful as any rifle. Still, the program was cloaked in secrecy for decades after the war. Officially, it never existed. Even in post-war CIA histories, references to sauerkraut were either redacted or misattributed to unrelated deception campaigns. After Germany's surrender, surviving operatives were quietly repatriated or resettled under assumed identities. Some former German agents received new papers and vanished into civilian life in America and Britain. Others, fearing reprisal, disappeared into post-war Europe. In 1952, one OSS veteran described the operation anonymously in a journal article. "We sent ghosts into Germany. Some returned, most didn't, and those who did could never tell their story." Modern historians now consider Operation Sauerkraut one of the earliest large-scale psychological warfare programs ever attempted. It combined propaganda, deception, and human manipulation in ways that foreshadowed Cold War espionage tactics. Yet the deeper mystery remains. How many of these agents truly switched loyalties, and how many played a double game, feeding both sides in an effort to survive? In 1988, a declassified OSS memorandum added one final haunting note. It read, "Subject Hoff, presumed executed, possibly survived. Subsequent intelligence traces indicate activity in Munich 1946-47. No further record was ever found. Whether Hoff truly lived, or whether his name became another ghost in the long shadow of wartime deception, remains unknown. Operation Sauerkraut revealed the blurred lines between truth and falsehood, loyalty and survival. It was the psychological mirror of war, where victory depended not only on what the enemy believed, but on what they could no longer trust. And as the OSS prepared to dissolve at the end of 1945, its final task was to bury these secrets deep, missions, names, and operations that would remain hidden for decades. But history, like war, has a way of uncovering what was meant to stay lost. The revelation would come years later, as declassified documents and personal letters surfaced, exposing the full scope of America's secret war in the shadows of World War II. Those discoveries, the truth behind the OSS's most classified missions, form the closing chapter of this hidden legacy. When World War II ended in 1945, the world rejoiced. But beneath the parades and celebrations, a quieter reckoning began, one that would take decades to unfold. The Office of Strategic Services, whose agents had operated in silence across the globe, was abruptly dissolved on October 1st, 1945. Its files were boxed, sealed, and scattered across military archives. Many of its operatives returned home under assumed names, their missions never acknowledged, their sacrifices erased by official secrecy. But history has a way of resurfacing its own ghosts. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, as the US government began a wave of declassification, fragments of the OSS's hidden war began to emerge. Old field reports surfaced from warehouses in Maryland and London, coded transmissions, mission rosters, and faded photographs labeled only with codenames: Ginny, Jedburgh, Cardinal, Sauerkraut. What had once been rumors among veterans suddenly became documented reality. The OSS's most secret missions were no longer myth, they were fact, etched in ink and blood. Historians pieced together the evidence slowly. Operation Ginny's field logs revealed the fatal third landing that doomed its saboteurs. The Jedburgh documents unearthed the names of missing teams in France whose remains were never recovered. Files from Detachment 101 shed light on the disappearance of Operation Cardinal in the Burmese highlands, a mission that, until those papers appeared, had been officially denied. And in a locked folder marked Psychological Operations Europe, the first references to Operation Sauerkraut were found. Redacted, incomplete, and chillingly brief, these rediscoveries painted a portrait of extraordinary bravery and devastating loss. Men and women who had operated in darkness for their countries were finally brought, if only briefly, into the light. Some families received closure decades after their loved ones were declared missing in action. In one case, the niece of Lieutenant Vincent Rousseau, the leader of the ill-fated Ginny team, was shown her uncle's declassified personnel file in 1986. Inside was his final handwritten note to his superior, We go quietly tonight. If we fail, let history remember that we tried. Yet not all stories found resolution. Many OSS missions remain partially redacted even today. Key documents were destroyed at the agency's dissolution, and some were absorbed into the CIA's early Cold War archives. It's believed that a number of operatives from Sauerkraut and Cardinal were later recruited into post-war intelligence programs, their wartime aliases preserved under new covers. The line between wartime espionage and Cold War operations blurred beyond recognition. Even General Wild Bill Donovan, the founder of the OSS, foresaw this ambiguity. In a 1945 memo to President Truman, he wrote, "The shadows we have cultivated in war will serve us in peace, though they may outlive those who cast them." It was both a warning and a prophecy. The OSS's techniques, sabotage, deception, psychological warfare, became the blueprint for modern intelligence. The Central Intelligence Agency, established in 1947, inherited not only its methods, but many of its ghosts. By the early 2000s, the OSS legacy was finally acknowledged. The US Congress awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to all members of the OSS in recognition of their service. Veterans who had kept silent for half a century were invited to share their stories. Their testimonies filled in gaps that even classified records could not explain. The confusion, the fear, the moral grey zones of secret war. One former operative summed it up best. "We lived in the cracks of history. Now the light has found us, but the cracks are still there." Still, some questions remain unanswered. What truly happened to Captain Temple's team from Operation Cardinal after their last transmission? Were fragments of Sauerkraut's deception network absorbed into post-war intelligence projects? And how many unmarked graves across Europe and Asia still conceal the remains of OSS agents whose missions were erased for national security? These questions form the haunting legacy of the OSS, an organization born from necessity, fueled by ingenuity, and defined by secrecy. Its operatives operated without glory, without recognition, often without survival. Their stories were hidden for decades, protected not by censorship, but by silence. And even now, as documents continue to surface, it's clear that some truths will remain just beyond reach, buried in archives, or in the jungles, or at the bottom of cold European rivers where evidence was once discarded. Yet the echoes of their work endure. The lessons learned from sabotage teams in France, from guerrilla warfare in Burma, and from deception operations in Italy and Germany, shaped not only the outcome of World War II, but the intelligence architecture of the modern world. They taught the West that information, and the ability to control it, could win wars as effectively as any weapon. The OSS was more than an agency. It was a laboratory of human risk. Its legacy lies not in medals or memorials, but in the invisible victories that altered history's course. For every operation exposed, another remains untold, classified, forgotten, or perhaps never written down at all. And so, the story of the OSS's most secret missions, hidden for decades, closes not with certainty, but with mystery, fitting for an organization built on shadows. Somewhere, in the yellowed pages of declassified reports and in the unmarked graves of silent heroes, the last words of those who served still whisper through history. The mission continues. Do not forget us.